Here's the moment that usually confuses people. Max Verstappen wins a race, loses a race, dominates a season, or struggles through one. And he looks the same. No visible surge, no visible drop. So the question keeps coming back, what motivates Max Verstappen? But that question already assumes something is missing. Motivation usually appears when performance needs to be pulled forward, when energy has to be summoned, when focus has to be manufactured. By the end of this, it becomes clear why Max Verstappen performs even when motivation is irrelevant, and why that makes him different from almost everyone else on the grid. Why motivation is overrated in Formula One. In Formula One, motivation is treated like fuel. It spikes before big moments, fades after success, rises with rivalry, and drops with comfort. That emotional cycle is normal, but it's also inherently unstable. Motivation depends on feeling, and feeling fluctuates constantly with results, environment, and expectation. That's why even great drivers can look sharp one weekend and disconnected the next. The problem is that motivation creates effort, but it doesn't guarantee consistency. And consistency is what this sport actually rewards. The drivers who succeed aren't the ones chasing emotional peaks. They're the ones who've built systems that work regardless of how they feel. They've learned to perform when motivation is high and when it's completely absent, because they understand that relying on feeling alone will always leave gaps in performance when it matters most.
What Max uses instead.
Max Verstappen doesn't wait to feel motivated. He operates from baseline standards, and this is the key distinction that separates elite performers from those who fluctuate with circumstances. Performance for him isn't a response to incentive or external validation. It's an expectation that exists regardless of context. The car can be dominant or difficult. The championship can be secure or slipping away. The pressure can be mounting or absent. None of it matters. The behavior doesn't change. Not because he's emotionally detached from the outcome, but because performance isn't optional in his internal framework. It's assumed. It's the default setting. There's no negotiation with effort, no internal debate about whether today warrants full commitment. The standard is non-negotiable, and it precedes every session, every lap, every moment behind the wheel. Hunger versus calibration. This is where confusion often creeps in. People describe Max as hungry, but hunger implies chasing reward. It implies desire driving action. That's not what's happening here. Hunger looks outward, constantly seeking external validation and the next conquest. Calibration looks inward, monitoring systems and making micro-adjustments. Verstappen doesn't chase validation or feed off external motivation. He adjusts behavior to conditions with surgical precision. When the environment changes, the response is technical, not emotional. It's measured, calculated, deliberate. Hunger wants more, always reaching for what's beyond grasp. Calibration protects execution, ensuring what's already working continues to work flawlessly under pressure. How this shows up under pressure. You can see this most clearly in how he behaves when pressure is supposed to rise. Preparation doesn't change whether he's leading the championship or chasing it. There's no visible emotional spike before important races. There's no visible collapse after wins or losses. That's not lack of care, it's lack of fluctuation. When consistency replaces motivation, performance stops depending on emotional peaks. And that's why his weekends often look similar regardless of context. What separates him isn't intensity, it's invariance. While others ride waves of emotion, he operates from a baseline that doesn't shift with circumstances. This steadiness means his worst days rarely dip as low as others, but his peaks don't soar quite as high either. The result is a driver whose output remains remarkably stable, insulated from the psychological turbulence that derails competitors when stakes escalate or expectations mount. When dominance ends, motivation usually appears. When dominance fades, urgency normally arrives. Drivers push harder, They talk more. They frame entire seasons around effort and intent. That didn't happen here. When titles weren't guaranteed anymore, many expected Verstappen to become louder, sharper, more urgent in his approach. Instead, he simplified everything. He reduced risk wherever possible, narrowed his focus to what mattered most, and managed his exposure carefully. That's the opposite of motivational behavior driven by passion or desperation. It's standard-driven behavior, calculated and methodical. It's the response of someone operating from a playbook rather than emotion, prioritizing consistency over spectacle, and treating competition as a problem to solve rather than a battle to win through sheer force of will. The silent standard he holds himself to, one of the clearest indicators, is what doesn't happen. Missed opportunities are acknowledged privately, not explained publicly. Errors are corrected immediately, not narrated. There's no visible self-story being constructed. Motivation talks. Standards act. When performance is governed by standards, explanation becomes unnecessary. Correction replaces expression. That's why Verstappen rarely frames his season emotionally. He doesn't need to justify it to himself. Why this separates him from most champions. Many champions rely on external structures to sustain performance. Rivalries, public pressure, legacy narratives, those things sharpen focus, but they also introduce dependency. When the narrative weakens, so does urgency. Verstappen doesn't require any of that to function. There's no visible reliance on rivalry to elevate him. No need for stakes to be framed loudly. The work happens whether anyone is watching or not. Why this is hard to copy. This approach is difficult to replicate because it demands something uncomfortable. Comfort without praise, performance without emotional payoff, accountability without an audience. Most drivers need stakes to focus. They need something external to pull intensity forward. Max doesn't. He needs clarity. Once clarity exists, even if it confirms limitations, behavior stabilizes. That's not common. Why he doesn't need motivation. This leads to the real conclusion. Max Verstappen doesn't need motivation because his performance isn't driven by desire. It's governed by standards. Standards don't fluctuate with results. They don't spike or collapse. They don't need emotional reinforcement. That's why his performance doesn't fade after success, and why it doesn't surge dramatically under threat. It's already there. People keep asking what motivates Max Verstappen, but motivation comes and goes. Standards don't. And that's why Max Verstappen keeps performing, whether there's something obvious to win or not. If you're Orange Army, you've seen this pattern long enough to recognize it without headlines. Share this with another Max fan who understands that consistency isn't built on motivation. It's built on expectation.